Marcus was reviewing quarterly budget reports when the doorbell rang at 2:47 p.m. Through the window, he could see a black sedan in his driveway and a man in an expensive suit standing on his front porch. Karen's lawyer had arrived faster than he'd expected. Mr. Chen. The man was tall, silver-haired, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from charging $400 an hour. I'm Robert Steinberg, representing Mrs. Karen Weatherby. Do you have a moment to discuss this morning's incident? Marcus opened the door wider. Of course. Come in. Steinberg's eyebrows rose slightly. Most people didn't invite lawyers into their homes quite so readily. I appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Chen. Mrs. Weatherby has asked me to address what she considers to be a deliberate assault using your irrigation system. Would you like some coffee? Marcus asked, leading him into the living room. I just made a fresh pot. That's very kind, but I'm here on business. Steinberg pulled out a leather portfolio and set it on the coffee table. Mr. Chen, my client alleges that you deliberately activated your sprinkler system with the intent to cause her harm and humiliation. Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from the lawyer. That's an interesting allegation. Does she have any evidence to support it? The timing of the activation, combined with your prior knowledge that she would be inspecting your pool installation, suggests premeditation. Inspecting? Marcus set down his mug. Mr. Steinberg, your client was trespassing on my property. She opened a gate clearly marked private property and entered my backyard without permission. Steinberg consulted his notes. Mrs. Weatherby indicates she was exercising her authority as HOA president to ensure compliance with community standards. The HOA has no authority over legally permitted pool installations on private property. I checked the covenant thoroughly before construction began. Nevertheless, the deliberate activation of sprinklers constitutes. The sprinklers activate automatically every morning at 6:45, Marcus interrupted. They've run on that schedule for 3 months. I have the programming records. If you'd like to see them. Steinberg paused. This wasn't going the way he'd expected. You're saying the activation was automatic? Completely automatic. Would you like to see the system? 20 minutes later, Marcus was leading the lawyer through his backyard, pointing out the various components of his irrigation setup. Steinberg examined the timer controls, the zone mapping, and the programming schedule with the thoroughness of someone who charged by the hour. As you can see, Marcus explained, Zone 7 has been programmed to run at 6:45 a.m. and 6:45 p.m. since I installed the system in April. The settings haven't been changed. But you could change them manually. Of course. It's my system. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the app. I can adjust timing, duration, pressure, coverage area, whatever I need. And did you make any manual adjustments this morning? Marcus looked at him directly. Mr. Steinberg, are you asking if I deliberately soaked your client? I'm asking if you manually activated the system when you saw her in your backyard. She was trespassing on my property at the exact time my sprinklers were scheduled to run. If she'd stayed on the sidewalk, she would have remained completely dry. Steinberg made notes in his portfolio. Mrs. Weatherby feels this was a deliberate trap. Mrs. Weatherby broke into my backyard during scheduled irrigation time and got wet. The only trap was her own poor decision-making. She didn't break in. The gate was unlocked. The gate was on my property. The fact that it wasn't locked doesn't give her permission to enter. Steinberg studied the sprinkler setup for another moment. What exactly is Zone 8? Marcus smiled. Would you like to see? 5 minutes later, Steinberg was standing in Marcus's front yard, looking at what appeared to be a completely normal residential landscape. Green lawn, flower beds, mature trees, and neat border along the driveway. I don't see anything unusual, the lawyer said. Zone 8 is more subtle than Zone 7, Marcus explained. It's designed for specific situations. What kind of situations? Marcus pointed to a series of nearly invisible sprinkler heads embedded along the property line between his yard and Karen's. Motion-activated misters. Very low pressure, very fine spray. Barely noticeable unless you're standing directly in the coverage area. Motion activated. If someone stands on the property line for more than 30 seconds, the system assumes they are trying to have a conversation with someone in my yard and provides a gentle cooling mist. Very neighborly. Steinberg looked skeptical. That seems like an unusual feature for a residential irrigation system. I'm an engineer, Marcus said. I like to solve problems creatively. And when did you install this? Zone 8. This morning. Right after your client threatened to escalate our property dispute. The lawyer wrote this down carefully. Mr. Chen, are you attempting to intimidate Mrs. Weatherby? I'm attempting to water my lawn and maintain appropriate boundaries with my neighbors. If Mrs. Weatherby finds that intimidating, perhaps she should reconsider her approach to neighborhood relations. Steinberg's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned. Excuse me, I need to take this. Marcus watched as the lawyer walked a few steps away and answered the call. From his expression, it wasn't good news. Mr. Steinberg, a voice called from the sidewalk. Robert Steinberg. A woman in her 60s was approaching from the house across the street. Marcus recognized her as Mrs. Patterson, the one who'd been watching from her window that morning. Yes? Steinberg replied, still holding his phone. I'm Dorothy Patterson. I live right there. She pointed to her house. I just wanted to say that I saw the whole thing this morning and that young man didn't do anything wrong. Steinberg looked between Mrs. Patterson and Marcus. You witnessed the incident. Witnessed it? Honey, I filmed it. Karen Weatherby has been terrorizing this neighborhood for years, and it's about time someone stood up to her. You should have seen her marching around his backyard like she owned the place. The sprinklers came on right on schedule, just like they do every morning. You filmed it? Oh yes. Though I didn't post it on Facebook. That was my granddaughter. She thought it was hilarious. Mrs. Patterson smiled at Marcus. She shared it with all her college friends. Last I checked, it had over 3,000 views. Steinberg's phone rang again. This time he answered immediately. Yes, Karen. I'm at his house now. He listened for a moment, his expression growing more concerned. How many views? Are you sure? Well, when did that happen? Marcus and Mrs. Patterson exchanged glances. Karen, I think we need to discuss strategy. This may not be the approach we want to take. Another pause. I understand you're upset, but the video evidence actually supports his version of events. And now that it's gone viral. Mrs. Patterson leaned closer to Marcus. She's not taking this well, is she? No, Marcus said quietly. I don't think she is. Steinberg ended the call and walked back over to them. Mr. Chen, I think there may have been some misunderstanding about this morning's events. Mrs. Weatherby is reconsidering her legal options. Because of the video. Because of several videos. Apparently there are now multiple angles of the incident, and they all show her entering your property without permission right before the sprinklers activated. Mrs. Patterson beamed. The Hendersons got a great shot from their kitchen window. And the Miller's security camera caught the whole thing from the side angle. Karen slipping in the mud is really something to see. Mrs. Patterson, Steinberg said carefully, are you saying multiple neighbors recorded this incident? Oh honey, we've all been recording Karen for months. You never know when you might need evidence of her behavior for the HOA meetings. Steinberg looked like he'd swallowed something unpleasant. I see. His phone buzzed with a text. He read it and his face went pale. Mr. Chen, I'm afraid I need to leave. Mrs. Weatherby has developed some additional concerns. Nothing serious, I hope. The local news station wants to interview her about the viral video. Apparently someone shared it in a community group about difficult neighbors and it's gaining significant traction. Mrs. Patterson clapped her hands together. Oh, how wonderful. Karen always did love being the center of attention. Steinberg packed up his portfolio quickly. Mr. Chen, I'll be in touch if Mrs. Weatherby decides to pursue this matter further. But between you and me, I'd recommend she focus on damage control rather than litigation. After the lawyer left, Mrs. Patterson lingered on the sidewalk. You? No, she said, I've lived in this neighborhood for 28 years. I've seen a lot of HOA presidents come and go. And Karen's reign of terror is about to end. The community Facebook group is planning an emergency HOA meeting for tomorrow night. Word is, they are calling for a vote of no confidence. Marcus felt a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Honey, you didn't make her trespass on your property. You didn't make her spend 12 years alienating every neighbor within 3 blocks. You just provided the spark. That evening, Marcus was grilling burgers for dinner when he heard shouting from next door. Through the fence, he could see lights on in every room of Karen's house and shadows moving frantically behind the windows. His phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. The video of Karen. The security camera caught it all, Karen's designer heels clicking across my driveway at 6 a.m., her perfectly manicured finger jabbing toward my backyard pool like she owned it. My property value is dropping because of your eyesore, she shrieked. Mascara already running down her cheeks. But when I calmly said those 2 little words that would change everything, no, I pull, her face twisted into something unrecognizable. She had no idea I'd been planning this moment for months. She had no idea about the sprinkler system. And she definitely had no idea that by the time the water stopped flowing, one of us would be calling the police and it wouldn't be me. Marcus Chen had been awake since 4:30 a.m., not because he wanted to be, but because the sound of Karen Weatherby's heels on concrete had become his alarm clock. Every morning, like clockwork, she'd emerge from her McMansion next door and find something new to complain about. Today was different, though. Today, Marcus was ready. He watched through his kitchen window as she marched across the perfectly manicured lawn that separated their properties, well, what she considered perfectly manicured. Karen had strong opinions about lawn care, about fence heights, about the color of mailboxes, and especially about his pool. The pool that had cost him 2 years of overtime shifts at the engineering firm. The pool that his 8-year-old daughter Emma had been begging for since she learned to swim. The pool that, according to Karen, was an absolute travesty of suburban planning. Marcus sipped his coffee and checked his phone. The Ring doorbell camera was already recording. Perfect. The doorbell didn't ring. Karen never bothered with doorbells. Instead, she pounded on his front door with the fury of someone who'd discovered a personal affront to her very existence. Marcus. Marcus. Open this door right now. He took another slow sip of coffee, counted to 10, then walked to the door. When he opened it, Karen was standing there in a crisp white blazer and matching pants, her blonde hair pulled back in a power bun that probably cost more than his monthly water bill. Her face was already flushed red, and her eyes had that wild look that meant she'd been building up to this confrontation for hours. Good morning, Karen, Marcus said evenly. It's 6:15 a.m. Don't you good morning me, she snapped, pushing past him into his foyer. We need to talk about that monstrosity you've built in your backyard. Marcus closed the door slowly, his engineering mind already calculating the precise sequence of events he'd been planning for 3 months. The pool. The one that's entirely on my property, built to code, and properly permitted. Karen whirled around, her designer purse swinging with the momentum. Permitted doesn't mean appropriate, Marcus. Do you have any idea what you've done to my property value? What you've done to the entire neighborhood? Enlighten me. She pulled out her phone, swiping furiously until she found what she was looking for. I had my realtor run the numbers. Your little water park has decreased my home value by at least $40,000. 40,000. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Your realtor told you that installing a pool next door decreased your property value. The noise, Marcus. The splashing, the filter running, the children screaming. And don't get me started on the privacy issues. Every time I try to enjoy my morning coffee on my deck, I have to look at that chlorinated nightmare. So, you want me to remove my pool because you don't like looking at it? I want you to be a responsible neighbor, Karen said, her voice rising an octave. I want you to think about someone other than yourself for once. I've lived in this neighborhood for 12 years, Marcus. 12 years of building relationships, maintaining standards, creating a community that people actually want to live in. And I've lived here for 2 years, working 60-hour weeks to afford a house where my daughter can have a childhood. Karen's laugh was sharp and bitter. Oh, please. Don't make this about your daughter. This is about you being selfish and inconsiderate. You could have installed a nice garden. A gazebo. Something that adds value instead of turning our street into some kind of suburban water park. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Emma was at her mother's house this week, but she'd be back on Sunday and she'd want to spend every possible moment in that pool. It was the first thing she'd asked about when they moved in. Daddy, can we get a pool? Please. I promise I'll do all my homework and help with dishes and everything. 2 years of saving. 2 years of research. 2 years of permits and contractors. And sleepless nights worrying about the cost. And now Karen Weatherby thought she could walk into his house at dawn and demand he tear it all down. Karen, he said carefully, I understand you have concerns. But the pool stays. Her face went white, then red, then something approaching purple. Excuse me. The pool stays. It's legal, it's safe, it's on my property, and my daughter loves it. Your daughter, Karen repeated, like the words tasted bitter. Let me tell you something about your daughter, Marcus. Last weekend, she and her little friends were in that pool until almost 10 p.m. 10 p.m. on a Sunday night. The noise was absolutely unbearable. They were inside by 8:30. Don't tell me what time they were inside. I was trying to watch Netflix on my deck, and all I could hear was screaming and splashing and that ridiculous filter motor. It's like living next to a public pool. Marcus took a deep breath. This was it. The moment he'd been preparing for. The moment when Karen Weatherby would finally understand that her reign of neighborhood terror was coming to an end. Karen, he said, let me ask you something. Do you remember what you said to Emma last month? The question caught her off guard. What? What are you talking about? Emma was playing in the front yard. She was practicing cartwheels on the grass. You came over and told her she was ruining the aesthetic continuity of the street. You made an 8-year-old girl cry because she was doing cartwheels on her own lawn. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. I was just trying to. You were trying to control something that wasn't yours to control. Just like you're doing right now. This is different. This affects property values. This affects, no, Karen. This affects your need to control everything around you. Your need to make everyone else conform to your idea of what a neighborhood should look like. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think you're so smart, don't you? You think because you have some fancy engineering degree, you can just do whatever you want and ignore the social contract of living in a community. I think I can use my own property however I want, as long as I follow the law. The law, she laughed again. The law doesn't cover common courtesy, Marcus. The law doesn't cover being a decent human being. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the app he'd installed 3 months ago. The app connected to the custom irrigation system he'd designed and built himself. The system that included not just the regular sprinklers for his lawn, but also a series of strategically placed misters and spray heads that he'd installed along the property line. The property line that Karen was currently standing on. Karen. He said quietly, I'm going to say this one more time. The pool stays. My daughter gets to use her pool whenever she wants, within reasonable hours, on my property. If you don't like it, you're welcome to move. Move. Karen's voice went up so high it almost squeaked. Move. I've invested 12 years in this neighborhood. I'm the president of the HOA. I organize the 4th of July block party. You terrorize everyone who doesn't meet your standards, Marcus interrupted. You've driven out 3 families in the past 2 years with your complaints and your demands and your threats about property values. That's not, I was protecting. You made Mrs. Henderson cry because her rose bushes were the wrong shade of pink. You filed a complaint against the Johnsons because their Christmas lights weren't tasteful. You actually called the city on a family because their 6-year-old left chalk drawings on their own driveway. Karen's face was getting redder with each accusation. Those people didn't understand what it takes to maintain a quality neighborhood. They didn't understand that you think you own the entire street. I do own this street. Karen exploded. I've put my blood, sweat, and tears into making this neighborhood something special. I've organized committees and raised funds and fought the city to get proper landscaping and traffic controls in, and you've made everyone miserable in the process. Miserable. Miserable. I've increased everyone's property values by at least 20%. I've created a community that people actually want to live in. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Karen Weatherby, standing in his foyer at 6:30 in the morning, screaming about property values and community standards while demanding he destroy something that brought his daughter joy. Karen, he said slowly, get off my property. She blinked. What? Get off my property. Right now. You can't just, we're having a conversation about, we're not having a conversation. You're making demands about my pool, and I'm telling you no. So get off my property. Karen's hands started shaking. Her carefully applied makeup was beginning to smudge around her eyes. You can't just dismiss me like this. I'm the HOA president. I have a right to, you have a right to leave my house when I ask you to. The HOA covenant clearly states, the HOA covenant has no authority over legal P. The spray hit Karen from 3 different directions simultaneously. Marcus had designed the Zone 7 irrigation system with the precision of someone who'd spent 15 years calculating water pressure and flow dynamics. The misters created a fine, soaking cloud that would have been perfect for cooling off on a hot summer day. The rotating sprinkler heads provided wider coverage with intermittent bursts of higher pressure. And the drip lines he'd installed along the fence delivered steady streams that turned the grass into a muddy slip hazard. Karen shrieked. It wasn't a scream of surprise or even anger, it was the sound of someone whose entire world had just shifted off its axis. Her white blazer was immediately soaked through, clinging to her like a second skin. Her power bun collapsed into wet strands that hung around her face like seaweed. Her designer shoe squelched as she tried to step backward and nearly fell into the pool she'd come to inspect. Marcus, she screamed, spinning in circles as the sprinklers continued their methodical watering cycle. Turn it off. Turn it off right now. Marcus appeared at his sliding glass door, coffee mug in hand, wearing the expression of someone mildly surprised to discover his irrigation system was functioning exactly as designed. Oh, Karen, he called out, having to raise his voice over the sound of the sprinklers. I didn't realize you were still here. The system runs automatically every morning at 6:45. Keeps the grass healthy. Automatic. Karen was now completely soaked, her mascara creating abstract art down her cheeks. You're telling me this is automatic? Well, Marcus said, taking a sip of his coffee, mostly automatic. I can override it manually if needed. But the grass does need water. Karen stumbled toward the gate, her heels sliding on the wet grass. Turn it off. I'm getting soaked. The cycle runs for 12 minutes, Marcus replied. Very efficient. Conserves water while ensuring optimal coverage. 12 minutes. Karen tried to run, but her designer heels had no traction on the muddy lawn. She went down hard, landing on her hands and knees in the soaked grass. Marcus. Turn it off now. I'd love to help, Marcus said, but you're trespassing on my property. I can't be responsible for your safety while you're here illegally. Karen struggled to her feet, her white pants now brown with mud and grass stains. Illegally. I'm the HOA president. I have a right to inspect, you have a right to inspect your own property, Marcus interrupted. This is mine. She made it to the gate and grabbed the handle, but it was slick with water and slipped from her grasp. She fell backward again, this time landing squarely on her rear end in a puddle that had formed near the fence line. You planned this, she gasped, struggling to stand while water continued to rain down on her. You knew I would come back here. You planned this whole thing. Marcus considered this. I planned an irrigation system for my lawn. The fact that you decided to trespass during watering time is just unfortunate timing. Unfortunate timing. Karen was on her feet again, but barely. Her hair was plastered to her skull and her blazer had turned transparent in places. You set a trap. This is assault. This is harassment. This is watering my grass, Marcus said calmly. On my property. With a system that's clearly marked and properly installed. Karen finally managed to get the gate open and stumbled out onto the sidewalk, leaving a trail of muddy water behind her. But instead of going home, she stood there on the public sidewalk, dripping and furious. You think you're so clever, she panted, pointing a muddy finger at him. You think you've won something here? I think I've watered my lawn. This is not over, Marcus. This is so far from over. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. I'm calling the police. I'm calling the city. I'm calling my lawyer. You might want to call a change of clothes first, Marcus suggested. Karen's face went through several colors as she tried to process the magnitude of what had just happened to her. The HOA president. The neighborhood standard bearer. The woman who'd spent 12 years building her reputation as the person you didn't mess with. Standing on a public sidewalk at 7 a.m., soaked to the skin, covered in mud, and shaking with rage. You have no idea who you're dealing with, she said, her voice low and dangerous. No idea what I'm capable of. I'm dealing with someone who just trespassed on my property and is now threatening me from a public sidewalk, Marcus replied. And I have it all on camera. Karen's eyes widened. Camera? Marcus gestured toward the corner of his house where a small security camera was mounted with a clear view of his backyard gate. Motion activated. High definition. Sound recording. I installed it after the Hendersons told me someone had been going through their garbage. You can't record me without permission. On my property, I absolutely can. And you're still in frame right now, so you might want to consider your next words carefully. Karen looked at the camera, then at Marcus, then down at her ruined outfit. For a moment, she seemed to deflate, the fight going out of her like air from a punctured balloon. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen and her face went white beneath the mud and running makeup. Oh God, she whispered. Oh no. Problem? Marcus asked. It's my husband. He's calling from Chicago. His conference doesn't end until tomorrow. She looked down at herself, then at Marcus's house, then at the camera that was still recording. He's going to ask how my morning went. Marcus almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Karen, he said gently, maybe you should go home and get cleaned up. She answered the phone with a voice that was trying very hard to sound normal. Hi, honey. How's the conference? Marcus couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but he could see Karen's face crumpling as she tried to explain why she sounded like she was standing in a rainstorm. Oh, I was just outside checking on the sprinklers. You know how I like to make sure the lawn stays green. Her voice cracked on the last word. She listened for a moment, then looked directly at Marcus with pure hatred in her eyes. No, everything's fine. Just a little gardening situation. I'll call you later. She hung up and stood there for a long moment, water still dripping from her hair, creating a small puddle around her feet. This isn't over, she said finally. The sprinklers? Marcus asked. They've got about 4 more minutes. You know what I mean. Marcus set down his coffee mug and looked at her seriously. Karen, it doesn't have to be anything at all. You could go home, change clothes, and we could pretend this never happened. I could even adjust the sprinkler timing if you want to discuss the pool situation like reasonable adults. For a moment, hope flickered across her muddy features. Really? Really? All you have to do is respect my property and my daughter's right to use her pool. The hope died. I can't do that. Why not? Because, Karen said, her voice getting stronger, if I let you get away with this, everyone will think they can do whatever they want. The Hendersons will plant those hideous rose bushes again. The Johnsons will move back and put up their tacky Christmas lights. Mrs. Patterson will let her grandchildren ride their bikes on the sidewalk without helmets. Marcus stared at her. You're saying you can't let an 8-year-old have a pool because it might encourage other people to enjoy their own property. I'm saying I can't let the neighborhood standards slip. Once they slip, you can never get them back. And you think your standards are more important than everyone else's happiness. Karen lifted her chin, despite the fact that she was still dripping wet and covered in mud. I think my standards are what make this neighborhood worth living in. Marcus watched her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone again. What are you doing? Karen asked. Adjusting the sprinkler schedule, Marcus said, tapping the screen. From now on, Zone 7 runs every 6 hours instead of just morning and evening. You can't do that. Watch me. He tapped again. And I'm adding Zone 8. What's Zone 8? Marcus smiled. You'll find out. Karen's phone buzzed with a text message. She looked at it and her face went even wider. Oh no. Another problem. It's Mrs. Patterson. She's asking if I'm okay. She says she saw me in my front yard this morning and I looked distressed. Marcus glanced toward Mrs. Patterson's house and saw a curtain twitch in an upstairs window. Looks like you have an audience. This is all your fault, Karen whispered. This is all your choice, Marcus corrected. You chose to trespass. You chose to ignore my property rights. You chose to prioritize your idea of neighborhood standards over an 8-year-old's happiness. Karen's phone buzzed again. Then again. More texts. Marcus asked. She looked at the screen with growing horror. Mrs. Henderson wants to know if I need help. The Millers are asking if there was some kind of accident. And she scrolled down. Oh God. Someone posted a video. A video. Someone filmed me getting sprayed by your sprinklers. It's on the neighborhood Facebook page. She looked up at him with wild eyes. 18 people have already seen it. Marcus's sprinkler system chose that moment to shut off, leaving the morning suddenly very quiet except for the sound of water dripping from the trees and Karen's ragged breathing. Karen, he said quietly, last chance. Go home. Change clothes. Let this go. She looked at her phone again. 24 people. Now. Mrs. Henderson commented with a crying laughing emoji. Karen. 31 people. Her voice was get. Marcus arrived at 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the emergency HOA meeting was scheduled to begin, and found the parking lot completely full. Cars lined the street for 3 blocks in both directions. Neighbors he'd never seen before were walking toward the building in groups, talking animatedly and checking their phones. Marcus. Mrs. Patterson waved to him from the sidewalk. She was wearing a bright purple dress and looked more excited than he'd ever seen her. Can you believe this turnout? How many people usually come to these meetings? He asked. 12. Maybe 15 if someone's complaining about the street lights. She gestured toward the community center. There are over 200 people in there right now. Through the windows, Marcus could see the main hall packed with folding chairs and standing room only around the edges. The energy was electric, like a crowd waiting for a concert to start. Is Karen here yet? Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted to something between pity and anticipation. Oh honey, you haven't heard. Heard what? Channel 8 ran the story at noon today. HOA president goes viral after backyard confrontation. They interviewed 3 neighbors on camera, showed the sprinkler video, and did a whole segment about neighborhood drama in the social media age. Marcus felt his stomach drop. They used her name. They used everything. Her name, her title, your address, the whole story. The reporter even found out about the Hendersons' roses and the Johnsons' Christmas lights. Made Karen sound like some kind of suburban dictator. Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted near the community center entrance. Karen's black Mercedes was pulling into the parking lot, moving slowly through the crowd of people trying to get inside. Marcus could see her through the windshield, wearing dark sunglasses despite the evening hour and what looked like a baseball cap pulled low over her face. She parked in the far corner of the lot, away from the main crowd, and sat in her car. For several minutes. "She's scared," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "Maybe we should." "No." Mrs. Patterson's voice was firm. "She made her choices, Marcus. Every single one of them. For 12 years, she made everyone else's life miserable because she thought she could. Tonight, she faces the consequences." Karen finally got out of her car and walked toward the building with her head down, trying to avoid eye contact with anyone. But the crowd noticed her immediately. "There she is. That's her. Hey, it's the sprinkler lady." A few people started taking pictures with their phones. Karen quickened her pace, practically running toward the entrance. Marcus followed the crowd inside and found a seat near the back. The main hall was buzzing with conversation, and he could hear fragments of stories from all around the room. "Told my 6-year-old she couldn't ride her bike on the sidewalk. Filed a complaint because our mailbox was 3 inches too tall. Made us repaint our front door because the blue was too vibrant. Called the police on a birthday party because they were playing music at 4 in the afternoon." At exactly 7 p.m., Karen walked to the front of the room and took her place at the head table. The hall fell silent immediately. She looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her hands shaking as she arranged her papers. "Good evening," she said, her voice barely audible. "I call this emergency meeting of the Willowbrook HOA to order." "We can't hear you," someone shouted from the back. Karen cleared her throat and tried again, louder this time. "I call this emergency meeting to order." "The first item on the agenda is..." "The first item," interrupted a voice from the middle of the room, "should be a discussion of your conduct as HOA president." Marcus turned to see Jim Henderson standing up. The elderly man who grew the roses Karen had complained about looked nervous but determined. "Mr. Henderson," Karen said, "you're out of order. The agenda has already been set, and the agenda," called out another voice, "was set by someone who's lost the confidence of this community." This time it was Sarah Miller, the woman whose Christmas lights had caused such controversy. She was holding a manila folder thick with papers. "I have here," Sarah continued, "documentation of 47 formal complaints filed by Karen Weatherby over the past 2 years. 47. Against 23 different families." A murmur ran through the crowd. "That's not..." "Those were legitimate concerns about community standards," Karen protested. "Community standards?" Jim Henderson was still standing. "You complained about my roses because they were the wrong shade of pink. You said they were aggressively cheerful and didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic." Laughter rippled through the room. "You filed a formal complaint," Sarah Miller added, "because my 8-year-old son left his bicycle on our own front lawn overnight. You said it created an atmosphere of residential chaos." More laughter, and now people were starting to stand up. "You made Mrs. Chen from Maple Street remove her bird feeders because they attracted too many cardinals," called out someone Marcus didn't recognize. "You tried to ban the ice cream truck from the neighborhood because the music was aesthetically disruptive," added another voice. "You complained about the Pattersons' granddaughter drawing chalk butterflies on their own driveway." The stories kept coming, and with each one, Karen seemed to shrink further into her chair. Marcus was beginning to understand that his pool confrontation hadn't been an isolated incident, it had been the final straw in years of accumulated resentment. "Order!" Karen finally shouted, standing up and banging her gavel. "All of you are out of order. I've spent 12 years building this community into something people want to live in. I've increased property values. I've maintained standards. You've made everyone miserable," shouted someone from the front row. "You've turned this neighborhood into a police state," added another voice. "You made my daughter cry because she was doing cartwheels on her own lawn." This last voice came from the back of the room, and Marcus turned to see a woman he didn't recognize. She was holding the hand of a young girl who looked about Emma's age. "That's not. I was just trying to Karen's voice trailed off as she looked around the room at 200 angry faces. Sarah Miller stood up again. I move that we hold an immediate vote of no confidence in Karen Weatherby's leadership as HOA president. Seconded came a chorus of voices. You can't do that, Karen said weakly. The bylaws require a formal petition process with Article 7, Section 3 of the HOA bylaws, interrupted a new voice. Marcus turned to see a woman in a business suit consulting a thick binder. Emergency votes of no confidence can be called by any member if supported by a simple majority of those present at a properly called meeting. Who are you? Karen asked. Angela Rodriguez, attorney. I live on Pine Street. You complained about my law degree diploma being visible through my home office window because it created an inappropriate commercial atmosphere. The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. All in favor of a vote of no confidence. Sarah Miller called out. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Hands shot up throughout the room like a forest of accusation. Marcus found himself raising his hand too, thinking about Emma's tears and Mrs. Henderson's ruined roses and the Johnsons packing their moving truck at dawn. Motion carries, Angela Rodriguez announced. Karen Weatherby is hereby removed from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. Karen stood there for a moment, looking around the room at the sea of raised hands. Her face cycled through several emotions: shock, anger, disbelief, and finally something that looked like resignation. Fine, she said quietly. Fine. You want to run this neighborhood without standards? Without someone who actually cares about property values and community reputation? See how that works out for you. She gathered her papers and started walking toward the exit, but Angela Rodriguez's voice stopped her. There's one more item of business, the attorney said. Given the recent viral video incident and the potential liability issues it raises, I move that we review all previous HOA actions taken under Mrs. Weatherby's leadership. Karen froze halfway to the door. What does that mean? Someone asked. It means, Angela explained, that every complaint Karen filed, every fine she levied, every action she took as HOA president can be reviewed and potentially reversed. If the community feels any of those actions were inappropriate or exceeded her authority, we can undo them. The room went completely silent for a moment as the implication sank in. Then Jim Henderson started to smile. Does that mean I can plant my roses back? In any color you want, Angela confirmed. Can we put our Christmas lights back up? Sarah Miller asked. As many as you want, as long as they meet city electrical codes. Can my granddaughter draw chalk butterflies again? Mrs. Patterson called out. She can draw a chalk rainbow if she wants to. Karen's face went from pale to green. 12 years of work, 12 years of building her vision of the perfect neighborhood, was being dismantled in real time. You're all making a huge mistake, she said, her voice shaking. You have no idea what you're doing. This neighborhood is going to turn into a circus. Property values will plummet. People will start doing whatever they want with no regard for your opinion. Marcus spoke for the first time since entering the building. The room turned to look at him as he stood up slowly. Karen, people